Thank you for being a part of our video presentation this evening. Whether you're a part of a small group already or whether you're watching this online, Aubrey and I hope that you're benefiting from this concept of faith fixer-upper as we look into our hearts and our lives and try to make changes that will bring about a more healthy spiritual way of living. You know, sometimes there are very obvious flaws in our houses that have to be addressed. Recently, our dryer went out. It wasn't too hard to figure out where I needed to go and what I needed to buy in order to solve the problem. If you see water dripping through your ceiling, you have a pretty good idea that you've got a leak and that a roofer is going to be a good person to have come in and try to solve your problem. There are other things that are a bit more hidden, though, may not show up quite as easily to the eye. You can have termites underneath your floor or working in a wall for years before that damage becomes evident. Tonight's topic of Faith Fixer-Upper is especially designed to deal with one of those big issues that sometimes lies behind everything else. We put on our glasses and we look out, if we aren't careful, we just see events like envy or anger or lust, things that we're talking about in this series. But sometimes we need a different set of glasses that allows us to see a different perspective that, as we're talking about tonight, we need to move from worldly to spiritual. That the way that we look at our 70, 80, 90 years that the Lord blesses us with should be focused not so much on this world, but should be more focused on the heavenly world that is awaiting us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, after Paul has introduced their problem of competitiveness, the divisive spirit that they've had of I am of Paul, I'm of Apollos, Cephas, Christ, all those different competitive spirits. He says to them in chapter 3, beginning at verse 1, "And I, brethren, I could not speak to you as spiritual men, but as to men of flesh, as to infants in Christ. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, for you were not yet able to receive it. Indeed, even now you are not able. For you are still fleshly. For since there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not fleshly? Are you not walking like mere men?" Some translations for fleshly have the word carnal. This worldly. They were so interested in being like everybody else and in competing that they lost sight of what it was that was spiritual. Someone had a bumper sticker one time that simply said, "He who has the most toys wins." And isn't that kind of the mindset of our world? Gaining, accomplishing, achieving, but by worldly standards, by carnal standards, not by spiritual ones. I believe the Lord has something better planned for us. I believe He desires for us to take off those worldly glasses that only sees dollars and cents and wins and losses, and to be put on a set of glasses that allows us to see Jesus, the spiritual heart that belongs to a true disciple of the Lord, and that we have a new life when we put Jesus on. It's not a new life in duration. It doesn't mean that we add days or years. It means that we have an entirely new quality to life, that our newness of life that we're raised to walk after our baptism allows us to have different values, different priorities, different definitions of success. Let me share briefly for your thought before discussion time 2 illustrations. One of those comes from the book of Daniel in the first chapter, verse 8. You remember Daniel along with some of his friends in 606 BC, the first group that were taken into Babylonian captivity, were there to be shaped with Babylonian culture. They were given new names, and then they were given a new diet. I want you to listen especially to verse 8. "But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself." Well, even over the objections of that official who thought somehow Daniel and some of his friends who had this diet that was consistent with their Jewish dietary laws would not look healthy. God blessed and God rewarded this. But why would He do that? He's in a foreign land. When in Rome, do as the Romans. He says, I'm not going to defile myself for the sake of my culture. I'm not going to do something that may have worldly benefit, advancement opportunities that's going to get somebody off my back or that even just tastes extraordinarily good. I'm going to put the will of God first. It's also interesting as you read through the book of Daniel, though he is referenced a number of times by the name of Belteshazzar, which was the Babylonian name given to him, he never gives up the name Daniel. And he is always addressed and referred to as Daniel, who's also called Belteshazzar. And I think that sets the stage even for Daniel chapter 6, when as an old man he refuses to fall into line with the culture and maintains his prayer life to Jehovah God and is cast into a den of lions. I believe we begin with a young man who was willing to not allow himself to be shaped by the things that the world wanted or that the powers that wanted, but to have a different standard. The second illustration maybe is a bit more familiar as we think about this context of moving from worldly to spiritual, and it has to do with a message Jesus shares beginning in Luke chapter 12 and verse 15. Then he said to the disciples, "Beware, and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has abundance does his life consist in his possessions." If we think our life is really defined by our possessions, we've missed out on where life really has its value. So he told them a parable. The land of a rich man was very productive. He began reasoning to himself, saying, "What shall I do since I have no place to store my crops?" Then he said, "This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Come, take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared?' So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." It is the foolish individual who confines his thinking to the standard of the world. It is the wise man who is able to open his eyes and to see the values that come from spiritual, heavenly focused living. It's a challenge. It's difficult in a world that is so fleshly and so carnally minded that wants to compress us to be like it. But it is the faith fixer-upper we need sometimes to put on the glasses of spiritual living. And I know you're going to benefit those who are with you tonight as you share your ideas and your suggestions to making those changes. Again, thank you for joining us. Enjoy your discussion.